My name is Aoni, and the day I left my village, I carried only a small bag and my mother's last words in my heart, which says, no matter where life takes you, walk like you carry the sun in your chest. I didn't know what those words meant back then. After my mother passed away, a distant uncle arranged for me to go to the city. You work for a rich madam, he said. She needs a house girl. Behave yourself and you will eat. I nodded, though I was scared. What did I know of the city? What did I know of the world beyond the red earth and cooking fires of my home? When we arrived, the compound looked like a palace. The gates were tall. The walls wore paint like jewelry. Everything sparkled as if it had never tasted dust. But instead of warm greetings, I was met with a cold stare. Madame Nkem stood on the balcony with her arms folded, regal and stiff. Her daughter Adeze stood beside her, chewing gum and inspecting me like expired food. This is the village girl, Adeze asked. She looks like she's never seen a toilet. I greeted them with respect. Good afternoon, ma. Good afternoon, auntie. Adeze laughed. She called me auntie, mommy. This girl is bush. Madame Nkem didn't correct her. She simply turned and said, Chibuzo will show you your corner in the boys' quarters. Wake up by 4 a.m. You'll be doing everything the other girl used to do and more. And that was how my journey began. Don't touch my slippers with your bush hands. Why are you breathing near me? Does your village not teach people space? When last did you see soap only? You smell like poverty. I swallowed every insult every time because I remembered my mother's voice. Let them laugh now, she said. When your sun rises, they will squint to look at you. But it was hard. One day, Adeze poured a whole bowl of garri on the... Don't touch my slippers with your bush hands. Why are you breathing near me? Does your village not teach people space? When last did you see soap only? You smell like poverty. I swallowed every insult every time because I remembered my mother's voice. Let them laugh now, she said. When your sun rises, they will squint to look at you. But it was hard. One day, Adeze poured a whole bowl of garri on the floor and told her mother I did it. I was whipped with koboko. My back burned. I said nothing. Another time, she told a neighbor I was mentally unstable, and that's why I was sent to the city. The neighbor laughed and called me local madness for weeks. Madame Kem was no better. She never once asked if I was okay. Never once thanked me for the endless chores. Only called me, you girl, or that bush one. But I saw things. I saw how Adeze sneaked boys into the house when Madame traveled. I saw how she pocketed money from the kitchen budget. I saw her pour water into wine bottles to pretend like she hadn't drunk them. I saw everything, but I said nothing because I had learned something powerful. Patience is not weakness. One Sunday afternoon, a man came visiting. He arrived in a black car and wore a calm expression that didn't match the chaos of the house. His name was Uncle Ebuka. He was Madame Nkem's friend from her late husband's side. He was soft-spoken but firm. And when I brought him malt and peanuts, I greeted him properly. He looked at me for a moment and said, "What is your name?" "Anwonli, sir." Anwonli. That's a good name, he said. It was the first time someone in that house said my name like it meant something. From that day, things shifted. Uncle Ebuka started visiting more often. And every time, he greeted me. He asked me small questions. He observed. He listened. And there's a noticed. Why is that man always asking about you? You think you're special because you can carry a tray, she said to me. I ignored her. But my heart began to beat differently. Because for the first time since I arrived, someone saw me. Not the maid, not the bush girl, not the servant, me. That night, After washing plates and sweeping the stairs, I went behind the house, faced the sky and whispered, God, if you can hear me, lift me. Let those who mock me see me rise, not with anger, but with glory. Let me wear peace like a wrapper and dignity like a crown. I didn't know it then, but my prayer had been heard, and the wind has started to turn. The next time Uncle Ebuka came to the house, I noticed he was watching me again. Not in the way a man watches a woman, but in the way a person watches a story that hasn't finished unfolding. I was serving him and Madam Nkem some fried plantain and fish, careful not to make eye contact when he asked, Awuni, are you in school? Madam Nkem scoffed before I could speak. Which school? That one? We brought her from the bush to help, not to learn. But Uncle Ebuka's face didn't change. He nodded and said softly, She speaks well for a girl from the village. Madam waved her hand like she was chasing a fly. Don't let her deceive you. These village girls pretend a lot. I stood still, head bowed, and quietly returned to the kitchen. But something had shifted. Something had entered in the air. From that day, he began stopping by more often. Once a week, sometimes twice. Sometimes he brought fruits, other times books. He never gave them to me directly. He would leave them carelessly on the dining table or behind the flower pot outside. And somehow, I would always find them. One day, when Madam Nkem stepped out to take a call, he whispered while I picked up the empty tray, You like to read? I nodded quickly, my eyes still on the floor. He smiled and slid a small novel across the table. It's about a girl who was looked down on, but ended up changing her whole world. That night, after washing plates and sweeping the corridor, I sneaked the book under my wrapper. I didn't sleep till the cock crowed. Adeze noticed. She always noticed things that didn't concern her. Why is that old man always leaving his books around? You think you're special because a wrinkled man gave you pepper? She said one evening, cornering me behind the house. I didn't say anything, I replied. That's the problem. You don't talk. You just watch like a snake. She spat near my feet and walked off. I was quiet, not because I was weak, but because I had learned that in silence, people reveal themselves. She started making my life harder. She would drop her clothes in the mud and say I didn't wash them. She told her mother I was stealing sugar from the kitchen. I was beaten again. Still, I said nothing until one day something happened. It was a Thursday morning. I had just finished mopping the living room when I saw the glass picture frame on the floor. Shattered. It was Madam Nkem's favorite wedding photo, the one she always dusted herself. I stood frozen. Adeze walked in and screamed, What did you do? My mother will kill you. I didn't touch it, I said. Who else touched it? Is it the air? You broke it. Madam came rushing out. What is it? Mommy, she said, she broke your wedding photo. I tried to explain, but it was useless. That evening, my bag was packed. I was to be sent back to the village. As I sat outside, waiting for the taxi that would carry me back to the bush, my heart felt like it had fallen through the cracks of the world. Was this how my story would end? Then I heard a voice. Why is she sitting with her bag? It was Uncle Ebuka. She broke my photo, Madam Nkem said. She's going home. He turned to me and asked, Awuni, did you break it? I shook my head. No, sir. He looked at me for a long time, then turned to Madam Nkem and said, Before you send her away, can you check the CCTV? Madam blinked. CCTV. Yes, I installed a security camera in the living room last month. For safety. Remember? Let's check. I watched Adeze's face change. She froze. No need to go through all that trouble, Uncle, she said quickly. But it was too late. They checked. And there, clear as day, was Adeze, running through the living room, kicking the table by mistake, and knocking the photo frame down. Silence was everywhere. Madame turned slowly to her daughter and asked her, "You lied?" Adeze burst into tears. "It was an accident. I was scared." Madame Nkem stared at me. I waited for an apology, but it never came. Instead, she said, "Go back inside. You still have work to do." But Uncle Ebuka said something that changed everything. He said, "Or she can come work for me instead." Madame Nkem blinked like she didn't hear what Uncle Ebuka had said. "You want her to what?" "I said she can come work for me. I've been needing help around the house anyway," he replied, calm as ever. Adeze was now crying in quiet sobs, not from guilt, but from fear. Fear that her lie had opened a door she hadn't intended to. Madame Nkem crossed her arms and asked, "What would people say? That you took in a house girl from my place?" Uncle Ebuka shrugged and replied, "Let them say what they want. She's not just a house girl. She's a child who deserves better than this." I looked up for the first time. His eyes met mine, calm, steady, full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. "You will come with me, Anwuli," he said, "but only if you want to." I nodded without thinking. My legs were trembling, my heart racing. I didn't know what was waiting for me at his house, but I knew I couldn't remain in a place where truth was buried under pride. Uncle Ebuka's home was not a palace, but it was clean, quiet, peaceful. He gave me a small room, my own mattress, and most of all, something I never had at Madame Nkem's place: respect. "You will work," he said, "but you also study. You read every night for 2 hours. I will help you." I wept that night, not because I was sad, but because I was overwhelmed. For the first time since my parents died, someone believed I was worth something. Days passed, then weeks. I cleaned, cooked, studied. I began to write too. Stories, ideas, thoughts I had kept locked in the corners of my mind. One evening, as I was arranging the bookshelf, Uncle Ebuka placed a small envelope on the table. "Open it," he said. I did. Inside was a school form. My name was already written on it. "You will start next term." I dropped to my knees. "Why are you doing this for me, sir?" He smiled and said, "Because someone did it for me once." 6 months passed. I was now wearing a school uniform again, carrying books with pride, walking beside students who didn't know I once washed plates for their mothers. One Friday afternoon, Uncle Ebuka handed me an envelope again. "You've been invited," he said. "Where?" I asked. "To Madame Nkem's house. Adeze is having a birthday party." I frowned. Why would she invite me? He looked at me carefully. Maybe because she wants to remind you who you once were, or maybe because she wants to see if you've changed. "I don't want to go," I whispered. He nodded. "Then don't go for them. Go for yourself." I went. The house was the same, but I was not. Madame Nkem opened the door and stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. "Only," she said, "you came." "Yes, ma," I replied. Adeze walked out, surrounded by her friends. She wore gold earrings and fake lashes, but her eyes told a different story. Insecurity. "You're looking different," she said. "Thank you," I replied. As the party went on, I stayed quiet, observing. Her friends whispered about me. "Is that the girl that used to live here? She looks better than Adeze. I heard she's schooling now, on scholarship." Adeze overheard, and then she did something that revealed her heart. She stood, tapped a spoon to a glass and said, "I want to thank everyone for coming. Some people here may think they have arrived just because they got lucky. But let's not forget where we come from. Her eyes locked with mine. And where we belong, she said again. The laughter was cold and sharp, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood too and I said, "Thank you, Adeze, for reminding me. I haven't forgotten where I came from. It's why I'll never treat anyone the way I was treated here." The silence that followed was louder than thunder. The silence after my words hung in the air like smoke. Adeze's smile cracked. Just a flicker, but enough. Her friends looked around, unsure whether to laugh or clap. Most just stared. I turned and walked away slowly. My spine straight like the story of my life was stitched to it. As I reached the gate, someone followed me. I only wait, the person said. It was Chika, Adeze's cousin. We had barely spoken during my time in the house. He had always watched from a distance. "You really said that in front of everybody?" he said. Then I replied, "I only said the truth." He nodded, looking impressed. "I didn't know you were in school now. You've changed." I didn't know what to say to that, so I simply said, "Everyone grows." "I wish Adeze would," he muttered, shaking his head. "She's been worse since you left." That surprised me. Worse how? "She's failing in school, always fighting with Auntie Kem. Sometimes I think you were holding that house together and nobody noticed." I blinked. Maybe that's why they tried to break me. They were afraid of how much I mattered. Uncle Ebuka noticed something had changed in me. I started dreaming bigger. I no longer just wanted to go to school. I wanted to become a writer, a teacher, someone who could lift others. "You have the voice of a person who knows pain," he once said. "People will listen to you." I began to keep journals, pages filled with thoughts, truths, and even letters to my mother, though I had no way to send them. One day, I wrote a short story and entered it into a regional writing competition for young girls. I didn't tell anyone, not even Uncle Ebuka. Weeks passed. Then one morning, as I came back from the borehole with a bucket on my head, Uncle Ebuka came rushing to me with a paper in his hand. "You won!" he shouted, out of breath. "Won what?" "The competition, first prize. They want to publish your story and interview you on radio." I nearly dropped the bucket. I had written about a girl who was treated like dust until she turned into fire. That radio interview changed everything. Suddenly, people wanted to know more about the girl who used to serve food in silence, who now spoke with wisdom far beyond her years. Madam Kem's church group asked if I could speak at a girls' seminar. The same woman who beat me with a broom now handed me a microphone. Adeze didn't show up that day, but many girls came. Young ones with tired eyes and silent mouths, just like mine used to be. I told them, even if no one claps for you now, keep building. One day the world won't be able to ignore your light. They clapped. Some cried. One mother walked up to me and said, "You've reminded me what my daughter could become." One rainy evening, the landline rang. I picked it up. It was Adeze. Her voice was shaking. "Aunlie, please, can I come see you?" My stomach turned. "Why?" "I don't know who else to talk to," she said. Uncle Ebuka wasn't home. I gave her a time to come. I told myself I was only listening, not forgiving, not yet. When she came, she wasn't wearing lashes or makeup. Her clothes were simple. Her hair was undone. She looked like a girl who had dropped every lie at the door. She sat down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't say anything. I was horrible to you. I knew what I was doing. I thought if I could make you small, then maybe I'll feel big." I looked at her and asked, "Did it work?" She shook her head, tears falling. "No, it made me emptier." I sighed. "I won't lie to you, Adeze. There are nights I still wake up remembering the things you said to me. How you laughed when I was beaten. How you made me feel invisible. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But I continued. I think I had to be broken to become unshakable. So, thank you. She looked up, confused. I'm not thanking you for hurting me. I'm thanking life for not letting me stay there. Adeze hugged me then. I didn't hug back, but I didn't push her away either. I didn't speak to Adeze again for many weeks. She left that day quiet, like she was afraid of waking the version of me she once tormented. But something had changed in both of us. Not friendship, not forgiveness, just awareness. We now saw each other not as we were, but as we had become. One warm evening, as I returned from school, I found an envelope tucked under the door. It was neat, cream-colored, with my name written on it. It was from Madam Kem. Only, she said, I don't know if you will ever read this, but if you do, I want to say something I've never said before. I'm sorry. Not just for how I treated you, but for what I allowed to happen under my roof. I thought I was shaping my daughter by lifting her above others, but I was raising a mirror of my own pride. Now she cries more than she speaks. She's failing school. She walks like she's made of glass. I see it now. You were never the maid. You are the one holding the house together, holding my daughter's conscience in place. You are the strength I tried to silence. If you ever decide to forgive me, I'll be grateful. Even if you never do, know that I see you now. Nkem. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not because I was ready to respond, but because I knew I would never forget it. A few months later, my school organized a recognition day for top performing students. Uncle Ebuka insisted I wear the traditional gele and lace blue blouse that once belonged to his late sister. You're carrying her legacy, he said. When they called my name, Anwunli Chidinma Eze, the hall erupted, not because they knew me, but because they had heard of me. The maid who had become the most graduating student. The girl whose story was now taught in the local girls' school. As I walked to the stage, I spotted a figure in the crowd, Adeze. She sat at the back, away from the lights. She clapped slowly. Her eyes were full, not with tears, but with something deeper, pride mixed with regret. And beside her was Madam Nkem. For the first time, she wasn't wearing gold. She wasn't trying to impress. She simply watched. When the speech ended, I stepped down from the stage and walked directly towards them. Adeze stood up. You were amazing, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Thank you. Madam Nkem rose too. Can I speak with you? I hesitated, then nodded. We stepped outside the hall. I came to say thank you, she said, for not letting pain ruin you. I looked at her closely. She looked tired, but there was humility in her posture now. I've watched you grow from a girl into a woman with more grace than I ever had, she continued. You've taught me something, Anwunli. You taught me what power looks like when it's silent but steady. I didn't try to teach you anything, I said quietly. I was just trying to survive. She nodded. Sometimes survival is the greatest teacher. There was nothing more to say, so I turned and walked away. A few years passed. I was now in the university, studying English literature. I had written a short book, a collection of stories titled Ashes and Wings, and it was gaining attention across the state. Then one day, something happened I had never expected. Uncle Ebuka called me. You have a guest. Who? She says her name is Madam Nkem. I froze. When I returned home, she was sitting at the same table where I had once eaten in silence. I came to ask for a job, she said. I stared at her. What? She smiled weakly. I've lost everything. Business failed. And as I moved to another town. I'm alone. And I hear you run a girls' foundation now. I want to help. I couldn't speak. The woman who once treated me like a dog was now asking to work for me. She looked down. It's okay if you say no. I understand. But I didn't say no. I said, everyone deserves a second chance. And just like that, the story turned. They say wounds can heal, but scars remain to remind us. Not all reminders are bad. Some become the reason we rise higher. I used to be the girl who scrubbed floors while Adeze painted her nails. Now I was being called to speak at a National Girls Education Summit in Abuja. I had written 2 books. I was mentoring young girls. And the same people who once looked down on me were now quoting my words. But the story wasn't over, because life had one more twist waiting. I was in my hostel room, preparing slides for my upcoming talk, when I received an email titled, Special Guest Proposal, Women's Empowerment Conference Enugu. It was being organized by none other than Mrs. Nkechi Adebayo, formerly known as Madam Nkem. Yes, her. She had completely rebranded herself, now working as a women's advocate after volunteering with my foundation for 2 years. She had humbled herself, studied and risen again. Her email said, Dear Aunli, your voice changed me. Your strength challenged me. It would be an honor to have you as the keynote speaker at this year's conference. The theme is From Silent to Strong. I believe no one embodies that more than you. Warmly, Nkechi Adebayo. I stared at the screen. Even though I had forgiven her in my heart, this moment felt surreal. It was like the final act of a story no one expected to end this way. I accepted, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted every other girl like me to see what was possible. Returning to Enugu felt strange. The last time I had stood in that city spotlight, I was a frightened teenager trying to find her voice. Now I stepped off the bus with my journal in my hand, my head held high. The event was held in a large community hall, packed with over 500 girls from nearby secondary schools. As I stepped onto the stage, I spotted familiar faces, journalists, teachers, even the principal of Adeze's former school. And seated in the front row was Adeze. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, she didn't look bitter. She looked proud. I walked to the podium and took a long breath. I was once called a house girl, I began. I was beaten, mocked, and silenced. But that was not where my story ended. That was only the beginning. The room fell still. I wasn't born with wealth, but I was born with fire. I wasn't raised with comfort, but I was raised with a conscience. And while others counted me out, I started counting my words, my steps, and my dreams. Faces began to shift. Some teared up. I used to think I had no voice, but it turns out silence can be the loudest seed. Applause broke out. When I finished, the room stood, and as I walked off stage, Madam Nkem, now Mrs. Nkechi, embraced me. Thank you for saying yes, she whispered. Thank you for becoming someone worth saying yes to, I replied. Later that evening, after the conference, I stayed back to help arrange books donated for the girls. As I packed them into cartons, someone approached me silently from behind. Aunli. It was a soft voice, fragile, unfamiliar now, but one I had known like the back of my hand. Adeze. I turned slowly. She looked different, simpler. Her makeup was gone, her hair in a modest braid. Her eyes held no arrogance, only humility. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded, unsure of what to expect. We stepped outside the hall under the purple-orange sky. She began, "I was angry for so long at you, at my mother, at life. I used to think your success made me feel small. But now I know. It made me face myself." I stayed silent, listening. "I want to change, but I don't know how. You turned pain into power. I've just been turning it into poison." I blinked. "That's the first step," I said, knowing the difference. "I want to join your mentorship program," she said suddenly. I nearly dropped the carton I was holding. "Not as a speaker," she added quickly, "but as a student. I want to learn from you." There are days I remembered would rather choke than say those words. But here she was. And so, for the second time in her life, she was starting over. When Adeze joined the mentorship program at our foundation, many of the girls whispered, behind her back, "Isn't that Madam Nkem's daughter? The one that used to bully Anwuli? She wants to learn now. Ha!" But I stood in front of them and said, the same way I was once seen as just a maid, later be seen as more than her past. That silenced them. And Adeze, she showed up every week, on time, no makeup, no complaints, just a notebook, a pen, and a fierce determination. It wasn't easy. She cried during one of the healing from shame session. She broke down while telling her story for the first time. Not the polished, pretty version, the real one. I was cruel, she admitted, her voice cracking, because I was scared. I didn't want anyone to see how broken I was, so I broke others first. Silence filled the room, and then a slow clap, then another, then hugs. Redemption had begun. A few weeks later, a national radio station requested to interview me. Anwuli, the maid who mends others. The producer was excited to feature the girl who rose from kitchen floors to national recognition. But then he said something unexpected. "We want to do a second part, featuring someone whose life your foundation has impacted." Before I could reply, Adeze volunteered. I was shocked. "You want to go on air?" I asked her. She smiled nervously. "I think I'm ready." And so we did it. On live radio, we told our story. Me, the girl who rose. Her, the privileged girl who fell and found purpose. Listeners called in crying. Some school requested we visit. A scholarship group offered support to Adeze to study social works abroad. The very girl who once laughed at my books was now becoming a guardian of broken girls. A few days after the radio interview aired, Adeze's old secondary school classmates began flooding social media with comments. She's rebranding herself now, after everything she did in school. Please, people don't change. They just hide better. One post went viral. An anonymous page posted an old video from their school days. Adeze mocking another student for having torn sandals. The girl had burst into tears. In the video, Adeze could be heard laughing cruelly. The backlash was instant. Suddenly, Adeze went from the rising redemption star back to the villain. She locked herself in her room for days, refused to eat, didn't show up to any of the mentorship programs. I went to visit her. She looked up from her bed, her eyes red. "I told you, I couldn't escape it. I thought I could become better, but they won't let me. Are they the ones deciding who you are now?" I asked gently. Then there was silence. "You're not hiding anymore, Adeze. You're healing. And healing isn't loud. It's brave. Let them talk." Adeze made a decision that surprised us all. She scheduled a public video on the foundation's social media page. No filters, no fancy outfits, just her, raw. She looked into the camera and said, "I was a bully, I was cruel, and I can't erase that. I hurt people, including the girl I now call my mentor. But I am no longer that girl. I've sat with my shame. I've named it. I've faced it. And I'm working every day to become the kind of woman I once laughed at. If you're watching this and I've ever hurt you, I am sorry. Not because I was caught, but because I have changed." It went viral again, this time with a different tone. This is what accountability looks like. Tears, realness, growth. I believe in second chances. Anwuli turned her enemy into an example. That's leadership. A month after that, I was called to speak at the National Women in Leadership Summit in Lagos. Before going up, I was told the second speaker was a young woman whose transformation story complements yours. To my shock, Adeze walked up to the stage after me. She stood behind the mic, took a deep breath and said, "I called her house girl once. Now I call her Mama only. Because the one I stepped on became the one who taught me to walk again." The crowd erupted. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. Two broken girls. One who was never expected to rise, and one who was never expected to fall. Adeze later traveled to the UK for her social work studies. We talk often. She volunteers for the foundation online now. We never became best friends. That's not how life always works. But we became something deeper. Sisters in survival. Because every story has villains and victims. But the most powerful stories, they allow both to change. The dry season had come again. Harmattan winds danced through the village with powdery breath, whitening the earth and cracking lips. The sky wore a dull haze, and the leaves on the cassava trees curled like clenched fists. Anwuli stood at the gate of her late mother's compound, now renovated and turned into a learning center for village girls. The signboard read, "The Mama Omalicha Empowerment House." She ran her fingers along the red earth wall. This was where it all started, where she had learned to sweep with her back bent like a hook, where her mother used to whisper prayers into her ear while braiding her hair with shaking hands. This land held not only roots but secrets. Adeze had returned from her social work course in the UK and requested to visit her father's land in the east. Something about wanting to connect with her paternal grandmother. Anwuli had agreed to meet her later in the village to open up the new learning center. What Anwuli didn't expect was the letter waiting for her. It was wrapped in faded clothes and handed over to her by Nneka, an old woman whose memory was sharper than any machete. "She said to give you this when you finally come back," Nneka muttered. "Your mother wrote it before she passed." Anwuli's heart jumped. She took the letter carefully and stepped aside, away from the curious eyes of the village women. The letter said, "My Anwuli, if you're reading this, then your feet have brought you home at last. There is something you must know, something I carried for too long, hoping the world would forgive me before you found out on your own. You were born not just of me, but of a bloodline connected to Madam Nkem's family. Long ago, before Madam Nkem became the rich trader's wife, she was known simply as Nkem Dia, the only daughter of Chief Onowu. She was my cousin, though we never said it out loud. Your grandmother, my mother, was her aunt. We were raised in the same compound, until greed and jealousy tore our family apart. When I got pregnant with you, I was thrown out. Madam Nkem, already rising in wealth, looked at me ashamed. She told everyone I had polluted the lineage with a bastard child. She made sure I never found work in the city, that every door was closed before I even knocked. But what she didn't know is that the child she called a disgrace would rise. You, Anwuli, are of the same blood that tried to erase you. But remember this, blood does not define you. What you do with your scars does. Forgive if you can, but never forget. Mama. Anwuli's hands trembled. Cousins? Madam Nkem, her oppressor, her enemy, was her family. And all these years, the humiliation, the insults, the rejection were built on secrets soaked in bitterness. She felt the weight of 2 generations crush her chest. A scream formed in her throat, but she swallowed it. There was no time for weakness now. Later that afternoon, Adeze arrived with her usual curious energy. She had traded her heels for sandals, her designer scarf for a local wrapper. She seemed at peace here, like she had found something pure, unpolished. Anwuli, she said, hugging her. This place feels sacred. It is, Anwuli said, watching her carefully. Adeze smiled. Grandma gave me an old necklace from my father's side. She said it once belonged to her sister, who was disowned. I think her name was Omalicha. The name hit Anwuli like a storm. Her mother. Her heart raced. Omalicha? Yes. She said they don't speak of her much. That she bore a child out of wedlock and was cast out. Anwuli staggered back. Adeze, that woman was my mother. Adeze blinked. Silence fell between them. The sound of distant drumming from the village square filled the air like thunder. I don't understand, Adeze whispered. I just found out today, Anwuli said. Your mother, Madam Nkem, she's my cousin. Adeze's eyes widened. That means you and I are family. The wind howled through the compound, as if the ancestors were stirring. That night, Adeze sat by the fire, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was trying to process it all. How could she keep this from me? She asked. She always warned me against women like you, but you're her blood. Maybe that's why she hated me more, Anwuli said quietly. Because she knew who I was and what I could become. Adeze looked up at her. What are you going to do now? Anwuli didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, I'm going to confront her. Not with anger, with truth. She needs to know I know. She needs to see that I survived everything she did to bury me. The next morning arrived with a kind of stillness that only came before a storm. Anwuli wore a plain wrapper and a simple blouse, just as her mother would have. Not because she lacked anything finer, but because this wasn't about wealth or appearance. It was about truth. Adeze sat silently in the passenger seat as they rode towards Enugu in a borrowed jeep. She had insisted on going with Anwuli, even though her hands trembled the entire journey. She had never seen her mother, Madam Nkem, afraid until now. She knows we are coming, Adeze said, as they turned onto the street. She heard you are in the village and that you've built Mama Omalicha's house. Good, Anwuli replied. Let her feel the ground shift beneath her. They pulled up to the large black gate of Madam Nkem's estate. The security guard at first hesitated, but quickly opened the gates when he saw Adeze. The house looked just as Anwuli remembered. Grand, boastful, proud, just like its owner. Madam Nkem stood in front of her house, already expecting them, but with a defense look. Well, she said slowly, if it isn't the orphan girl who polished my flaws. Adeze stepped forward. Mommy! No, let her speak, Anwuli said, voice calm but sharp. Madam Nkem narrowed her eyes. Speak what, eh? You think because you have a few degrees, and village girls shouting your name that you can storm into my house? Anwuli reached into her bag and pulled out the letter. I came with this, she said, from Mama. Color drained from Madam Kem's face. You know what this is, don't you? Anwuli stepped closer. Your aunt, my mother, Omalicha, the woman you helped disgrace. Madam Kem's mouth twitched. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I do now, Anwuli whispered. I know why you hated me even before I swept your compound. Because I was the ghost of the truth you buried. I reminded you of everything you tried to erase. Adeze looked from one woman to the other, unable to speak. Madam Kem's voice cracked. She got herself pregnant, shamed the family. She had no discipline, no respect. She had a child, Anwuli interrupted, and you turned the whole town against her. You turned your own blood into a pariah. There was silence. Madam Kem's hands trembled slightly. Her pride, always ironclad, began to show rust. You think I don't carry guilt? She muttered. You think I sleep peacefully? You think I didn't know who you were when I hired you as a maid? That caught Anwuli off guard. What? I knew, Madam Kem confessed, breathing heavily. The moment I saw your face, you had her eyes. I took you in because I wanted to control the damage. I thought if I made you small, you would stay small. Ateze's gasp filled the room like thunder. You knew? She said in disbelief. All this time. I was trying to protect what I built, Madam Kem shouted, her voice cracking like lightning. The name, the respect. I couldn't let people say I had a niece raised in shame. But you were never protecting us, Anwuli said quietly. You were protecting a lie. For the first time, the woman who once towered over her now seemed small. Anwuli didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stepped forward, stared directly into Madam Kem's eyes and said, You made me polish floors, scrub toilets, and eat the scraps of your table, but I became more than you ever imagined. She handed over a brochure of her foundation, showing girls in classrooms, learning tailoring, computer skills, public speaking. Don't call me Mama Anwuli, she said softly, just as they once called her Mama Omalicha. Madam Kem's lips quivered. I came here not to beg, not for your approval. I came to let you know that the blood you shamed gave birth to a legacy. Adeze's eyes welled with tears. Anwuli turned to go, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing, she said over her shoulder. Your daughter calls me Mom now. Madam Kem gasped, but Anwuli was already gone. The morning after the confrontation, word had spread like wildfire. In Amucha village, gossip traveled faster than rain on a zinc roof. She faced Madam Kemo, called her out with her full chest. Turns out Anwuli is her niece. So Mama Omalicha's daughter has returned in power. The market square was alive with voices, clapping and raised brows. Women whispered behind piles of tomatoes. Men shook their heads in disbelief. Children repeated what they heard their mothers say in hushed tones. Madam Kem's compound was no longer the place of pride. Her front gate was closed more than usual. Her workers moved quietly, avoiding her eye. Adeze had refused to eat the night before and instead stayed in her room, holding onto an old photograph of her and Anwuli taken during her birthday years ago. The same day Anwuli had made jollof rice that had stunned the whole compound. That morning, Madam Kem sat alone in her dining room. Her untouched tea had gone cold. For the first time in a long time, she was not the most powerful woman in the room because there was no one left to rule. She heard a knock at the door. The voice was sharp and firm. Good morning, ma. It is from the Igwe's council. Madam Kem's heart sank. She had been summoned. Later that day, a large crowd gathered under the ancient mango tree beside the Igwe's palace. The air buzzed with anticipation. Anwuli stood calmly beside Adeze, her face unreadable. She had been invited not just as a guest, but as a subject of honor. Many elders had been waiting to meet the young woman who built a foundation for girls, paid hospital bills in silence, and had recently funded the rebuilding of the primary school block. Igbo Chen declared his truth. "We summoned you, Madam Nkem," he said slowly, "because for years you carried the face of dignity in this land. Yet many had whispered of your treatment towards your kin." The murmurs rose. "We have heard from witnesses, including your own daughter," the Igwe continued. "You took in your sister's daughter, only to make her a servant." Madam Nkem shifted uncomfortably. "I did what I had to do. My sister shamed the family." Elder Chukwuma stood. "And what is the shame compared to denying a child love? You who have eaten from the tree of respect must also chew the bark of truth." Another elder added, "Anwule has done more for this village than many born into wealth. Is this not the daughter of Omalicha? Has she not restored the name you tried to erase?" The crowd erupted with approving voices. Adeze stood suddenly. Her voice trembled but rang loud. "I stand here today to say this publicly. Anwule is more than my cousin. She is my mother in every way that matters. The one who raised me, not with riches but with love, laughter and correction." Madam Nkem's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. As the meeting concluded, Igwe handed Anwule a sealed brown envelope. "It was found among the last belonging of your mother," he said. "She left it in the village trust before she died." Anwule opened it later that evening under a neem tree behind her mother's rebuilt house. The letter inside shook her. "My sweet Anwule, if you ever read this, it means truth has found you. I want you to know something. Your father was not a stranger. He was from this village, a man of status. I loved him once deeply, until I realized he could never claim you without risking everything. Your father is Chief Okoro." Anwule gasped. The name leaped off the paper like a snake bite. Chief Okoro, the respected businessman who had donated land for the clinic. The same man who years ago once looked her over during a school function and asked her, "What's your son's name again?" She remembered his stare. That meant she stood still, heart racing. Chief Okoro was Madam Nkem's family friend. He had supported her during Omalicha's disgrace. Was that out of guilt? Was that why Anwule was truly brought to Nkem's house in the first place? Adeze found her sitting still, letter in hand. "What is it?" she asked. Anwule showed her the letter. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Everything was connected," Adeze finally whispered. "Even your suffering, they all knew." Anwule blinked, her voice low. "They didn't just hide me because I was Amolicha's daughter. They hid me because I was a reminder of betrayal and power, and secrets they buried." Adeze took her hand. "So what will you do now?" Anwule looked into the fading sunset, her heart strong. "I'll finish what Mama started. I will not just rise, I'll rebuild. And this time, no one will be able to hide me." The next morning, the village of Amucha woke up, buzzing again. But this time, not just about the council meeting or Anwule's identity. Now a name echoed louder than all: Chief Okoro. Whispers floated across compounds, behind closed doors, in farm fields, and even inside the hair plaiting sheds. "Did you hear? They say he's the father of Anwule." "Yes, so, and that he knew all along." Anwule walked with purpose. Her wrapper was firm, her gaze forward. Beside her, Adeze walked silently. They passed through the village center and made their way to Chief Okoro's compound. The guards tried to stop her at the gate. "She's expected," said a calm voice behind her. It was the chief's assistant, shaking nervously. In the courtyard, Chief Okoro stood tall. He wore his usual white lace with a red cap, the beads around his neck a symbol of pride. But today, there was something dull in his eyes. Anwule said nothing. She handed him the letter. He took it with slow hands, opened it and scanned the contents. There was silence. Only birds chirped in the distance. Somewhere, a cock crowed late. Finally, Chief Okoro sat. I knew this day would come, he said quietly. Adeze stepped forward. So it's true. You're her father? He nodded. Anwuli's fist clenched, but her voice remained steady. Why didn't you ever speak up? Chief Okoro let out a breath. Because I was a coward. When I met your mother, I wasn't married yet. She was beauty and strength. She made me feel like more than a man of status. But when she became pregnant, I panicked. He looked down. My people were arranging a marriage. My father was grooming me for the chieftaincy. I could not bring what they called shame to the family. So I abandoned her. Adese shook her head in disbelief and let your friend Nkem treat her child like trash, like a maid. I didn't know Nkem would be so cruel, he said. At least not at first. When she told me she would raise the child in her home, I thought she was doing the right thing. Anwuli's lips trembled. You thought locking me in kitchens, calling me maid, denying my identity was the right thing. Chief Okoro stood up now. His face was wet with sweat or tears. I failed you. I failed your mother. I thought I could bury the past, but you grew. You rose. And every time I saw you in the village, it haunted me. Chief Okoro walked towards the drawer and brought out a golden key and a document. I own properties in the next town, and this key opens a house I kept hidden for years. I want you to have it. I've signed it over to you. Anwuli looked at the key. Then she looked at him. I don't need your house, she said. I needed a father. He flinched. I needed a voice to say, she is mine, when people laughed. I needed someone to defend my mother when she was being cast out. Anwuli's voice rose, not in rage, but in ache. You gave me silence. You gave me shame. You stood behind power and hid from responsibility. Chief Okoro fell to his knees, unexpected. A chieftain, humbled. I cannot undo the past, he whispered. But I beg, let me walk beside you now. Even if from a distance, let me support your work, your foundation. Let me be useful for once. I only turned to leave. If you truly want to support me, then tell the truth publicly. Let the village hear it from your mouth, not from mine. By that evening, word spread again. Chief Okoro had called for a press gathering, small, yet attended by many key villagers and the Igwe's maid aides. He stood before the cameras and elders, voice steady, though his hands trembled. I came today not as a chief, but as a father, a failed one. Anwuli is my daughter. Her mother was Omalicha, the strongest woman I ever knew. I wronged them both. He paused, clearing his truth. Let history remember her not as a maid, but as the daughter of a man who took too long to claim her. Gasps filled the air. Some elders nodded with solemn faces. Some villagers shed tears quietly. Some simply stood, stunned. Anwuli watched from a distance. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just stood tall. For the first time, they were the ones with heads bowed, not her. Over the following days, Anwuli was approached by women she had never met. You give us strength. You are what our daughters must become. We watched you in silence. Forgive us. Take this land. My husband said you can use it for your girls' school. Teach our sons better. Anwuli's name began to appear in the village newspapers. Sponsors reached out from cities. Meanwhile, Madam Nkem's social circle collapsed. Invitations dried up. Those who once flocked to her compound now passed by with silent greetings. Adeze moved into Anwuli's rebuilt house. One evening, while plaiting Adeze's hair under the moonlight, Anwuli said softly, Tomorrow I'll visit Mama's grave. I think it's time I tell her that the circle is finally closing. Adeze smiled. She already knows. That's why she's smiling through the stars. At dawn, the sky over Amucha wore a soft grey, like the village itself was preparing to exhale. Anwuli, wrapped in a simple brown wrapper, carried a basket of flowers and her mother's favorite dried herbs. Adeze followed behind quietly, holding a lantern and a small wooden stool. They walked past the old village school, past the stream where children still bathed and women washed pots, until they reached the slope behind the tall iroko tree. There lay the small grave, unmarked but well kept. Anwuli knelt gently and began clearing leaves from the mound. She spoke in a voice only her mother could hear. "Mama, it's me, your Anwuli." They finally know. He said it in front of everyone. "You're no longer a rumor. You are truth. You are history. And I am not a maid. I am your daughter. I am your pride." Adeze placed the stool beside her. Anwuli sat and opened the basket, laying the herbs across the soil, sprinkling petals one by one. She smiled. "I'm building the foundation, Mama, for girls like me, for girls like you. No one will hide in kitchens again. No one will be called servants in their father's house." Tears ran freely from her cheeks, but her smile remained. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just full of you, full of purpose." She reached into her wrapper and pulled out a small mirror, the one her mother gave her as a child. She placed it gently on the grave so the sky could reflect through it. "Mama, shine through me always." When Anwuli returned, she wasn't done. A group of young girls walked beside her, daughters of farmers, fishers, and even those who once whispered behind her back. They were laughing, free. That week, she launched the Daughters Table, a mentorship circle that welcomed any girl, any woman who needed community. There were lessons on self-worth, speech training, history of queens and warriors, and every story their mothers. Adeze taught accounting and herbal safety. One of the former maids taught tailoring. The old kitchen where Anwuli once slept became a mini library. The villagers began referring to it as Omalicha's house, in honor of Anwuli's mother. Weeks later, Chief Okoro returned, not as a chief with beads and titles, but as a barefooted father. He walked to the daughter's table, unannounced, carrying crates of book and bags of rice. Anwuli stepped outside. They looked at each other. "You still don't need my house?" he asked. "No," Anwuli replied, "but you can donate the land for our training center." He smiled. "Done," he replied. They shook hands, father and daughter. The past didn't vanish, but it was now shared. On market day, the Igwe's palace invited Anwuli to a gathering. She went, hesitant, unsure of what the men of the council would want. There, in full regalia, the Igwe stood. "We have wronged many daughters," he said, "but today, we start to rewrite that." Anwuli was handed a woven staff, a cloth with sacred symbols, and a document sealed with red wax. "You are now the first official daughter, custodian of Amucha, a voice for the voiceless, a mother for the abandoned." The crowd erupted in ululation. Anwuli stood in the center of the circle, strong, unwavering, no longer a maid, no longer a secret. That night, under the same stars her mother once cried beneath, Anwuli sat with Adeze outside Omalicha house. "Can I ask you something?" Adeze said. "Anything," Anwuli replied. "What would you have done differently if you could go back?" Anwuli paused, thought for a moment, and said, "I would have believed in myself sooner, that's all." And with that, they sat quietly, watching the night sky breathe. Months passed, and Omalicha house flourished. Young girls arrived from neighboring villages, some carried by aunties, others sneaking away from farms and markets just to sit by Anwuli and listen. It became a heaven. It became a name. It became a movement. On the first anniversary of the house, Amucha hosted a grand festival, Uchechi Day, meaning Wheel of the Morning. It was a villagers' tribute to Anwuli's late mother, whose name now graced the villagers' lips with honor. The square was full of drums, fireworks, smoke, freshly roasted yam, and songs that swelled the heart. But as Anwuli danced with the girls, a stranger stood at the edge of the gathering. A woman, tall, wrapped in royal green, her face partially veiled. Anwuli noticed her instantly, not because she was beautiful, but because she didn't clap. Later that evening, after the guests had begun to disperse, Anwuli found a folded note left on the stone step of Omalicha house. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp, elegant, and foreign. You wear your mother's name like a crown, but do you know whose blood runs in her veins? Meet me at the Iroko tree, midnight, come alone, signed E. Anwuli's heart pounded. The first letter of her mother's name was U, Uchechi. Her father's name Okoro, who was E. And what could possibly be hidden in her mother's past? She debated not going, but her soul stirred. The Iroko tree had always been sacred, said to whisper when no one watched. Anwuli arrived with only a wrapper, tied tight, and a single lantern. The veiled woman was already there. I came alone, Anwuli said. The woman removed her veil. Anwuli gasped. She looked almost like her, but older, refined. Her skin carried the same golden tone her mother's had. Her eyes, fierce, familiar. Who are you? My name is Ebelechi, the woman said. Your mother was my sister. Anwuli staggered back. My mother had no sister. She told me. Then she interrupted and said, she told you what she was allowed to. But the truth, child, was hidden beneath betrayal, jealousy, and the silence of men. Ebelechi reached into her wrapper and pulled out of a wooden pendant, one Anwuli remembered from a dream she had as a girl. It bore the same NCBD symbols she once found carved into her mother's comb. She was the first daughter, I was the second, and she was promised to a chief in Oba Kingdom. But when she fell in love with Okoro, they banished her. She was stripped of name and inheritance, and I was told never to speak her name. Anwuli's voice cracked. So why now? Why come now? Ebelechi's face hardened. Because I heard what you're building here, and the house sits on land that belongs to our family, to me. Anwuli's blood ran cold. Ebelechi continued. You were born from pain, Anwuli, but also from fire. I don't want your house. I want the truth to be known, that your mother was not a maid from nowhere. She was a daughter of royalty, and so are you. Anwuli dropped to her knees. Everything she thought she knew about her mother's past, being poor, hidden, ashamed, was only half the story. Her mother had given up a throne for love, and she, Anwuli, was royalty, hiding in plain sight. Anwuli sat beneath the Iroko tree, the night air thick with questions. You say you're her sister, she whispered, staring at Ebelechi. Why didn't you come when she died, when they buried her like a commoner? Ebelechi's face darkened. Because shame is a chain, Anwuli. Power doesn't forgive weakness. I was told she had disgraced us, that she ran off with a servant's son. Anwuli frowned. Okoro wasn't a servant. No, Ebelechi said, but it wasn't royal either. And to our family, that was worse. There was a long silence. Then Ebelechi said something that chilled her spine. I want something from you. What? The name Omalicha House. I want you to rename it. Why? That's my mother's name. No, Ebelechi cut in. Her real name was Obianuju. Omalicha was the name she gave herself after she was cast out. A name of exile. But her birthright, her legacy is Obianuju. Anwuli's hands trembled. You want me to rename the one thing I built in her memory? Yes, or I go to the Igwe and the Council of Elders and tell them the land belongs to my father's lineage. You will lose everything. Anwuli couldn't sleep that night. She sat by her mother's grave again, the wind quiet around her. She spoke through clenched teeth. What do I do, Mama? What if I change the name? Do I betray you? What if I don't? Do I lose everything we built? Adeze sat beside her, silent, then finally said, Your mother didn't run from royalty. She chose love. She gave you strength, not a name. If the house is for daughters who have been erased, then maybe giving her true name restores more than it takes. Anwule wiped her tears. She stood. Decision made. At the village square the next day, the girls gathered in front of the banner. Omalicha House 1 year celebration. Drummers waited, children clapped. The Igwe sat in full regalia. Anwule climbed the platform. Her voice rang clear. My name is Anwule, daughter of the late Obianuju. I have learned that names carry both pain and power. Today, I do not erase my mother's choice. I elevate it. Omalicha House was born from exile, but today, it becomes what she truly was. Obianuju's center for daughters forgotten. The crowd murmured, then clapped, then roared. Even the Igwe stood and nodded. Ebelechi, watching from the side, smiled faintly. She stepped forward, placed the old pendant on Anwule's palm and whispered, "You've done what none of us could. You freed her name." Weeks later, Ebelechi returned, not alone, but with women from across villages, elders, and landowners. Together, they donated 2 more plots of land to expand Obianuju Center. Girls now had dorms, a tailoring center, and a counseling hut. Anwule became more than a name. She became a force. Just as the Obianuju Center reached new heights, something shifted. At night, the girls spoke of a man who stood near the stream, always dressed in black, watching. Some thought him a spirit. Others swore he looked familiar. One evening, while closing the tailoring hut, Anwule heard a voice behind her. "You've changed." She turned and nearly dropped her basket. There, cloaked in a brown wrapper, was Chibundo, the boy who once laughed as she scrubbed his mother's floor, the one who mocked her when she ate behind the servants' quarters, the one she thought she'd buried in memory. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. "I heard what you've built," he said, his voice quiet. "I needed to see it myself, and I needed to see you." Anwule narrowed her eyes. "You are part of what broke me. You watched your mother treat me like nothing." "I was a boy," Chibundo said. "Stupid, spoiled, but I never forgot you. Not once." She stepped back. "So you came for what? Closure?" He shook his head slowly. "I came because I want to invest in your center." At first, Adeze was furious. "You can't trust him. That family is poison. You think because he grew a beard, he's changed?" But Anwule hesitated. Chibundo showed her documents. He had moved to the city, became a builder. He had access to engineers, architects. He offered to build 5 new learning rooms and dorms with indoor toilets. No strings, no name on the project, just to help. "I owe you," he said, "not for what I did, but for what I didn't do when you needed someone." Just as Anwule started to consider it, disaster struck. One of the young girls, Ngozi, ran away in the middle of the night. When they found her at the riverbank, crying, she finally whispered, "My uncle, he wants to marry me off to a man twice my age. He says no one here can stop it." Anwule's hand clenched. The uncle, a chief, one with influence. The village had long looked away from his affairs. Anwule stood before the Igwe and made a vow. If a girl cannot say no and be heard, then what we built here is a lie. That night, the chief sent men to threaten her. But when they came, they were stopped halfway by Chibundo and his builders, standing guard with machetes. He looked her in the eye. "I didn't protect you then, but I'll die before anyone touches these girls now." Later, by the firelight, Anwule sat with Chibundo. "You know," she said, "you may never wash the past off completely." "I know," he whispered, "but I'm here, if you let me be." A long silence. Then she said, "You can stay, but you start like everyone else. Carry water, clean floors." He smiled. "Then I'll carry them with joy." She didn't smile back, but she didn't walk away either. Chibundu worked with the builders and slept on a mat like the rest. But then the letter came. A royal messenger delivered it at dawn, sealed in gold. Anwale opened it with trembling hands. The Igwe summoned her to the palace. Reason: an accusation of dishonor, land encroachment, and rebellion against the elders' will. Signed by Chief Ozuoma, Ngozi's uncle. The palace was crowded. All the elders were present. The Igwe's face was unreadable. Chief Ozuoma stood proudly, with fake sadness in his voice. We respect her mother's memory, of course. But this girl, this maid turned messiah, is disrupting ancient customs, disgracing respected men, teaching girls to disobey fathers. Mom was echoed in the court. Anwale stood, her voice steady. I am teaching girls that no one owns their voice, not even their uncles. Chief Ozuoma laughed. Such arrogance. She has no husband, no backing. Who is she to speak in her sacred court? Suddenly, another voice rang out. She has me. All heads turned. Chibundu stepped forward, but not alone. Behind him, Ebelechi, dressed in her royal wrapper. My niece speaks with the strength of her mother and the truth of generations silenced, she said. She handed over another letter, a royal deed, proving the land the center stood on had been gifted to Awuli's mother long ago. A forgotten document, hidden, now revealed. The Igwe rose. Let truth speak louder than pride, he said. Chief Ozuoma, your complaint is dismissed, and you are hereby summoned for a private counsel on your past conduct. Ozuoma's face went pale. Anwale bowed. The palace cheered. That night, the center held a dance. Girls drummed and stomped joyfully. Anwale sat quietly, watching them with wet eyes. Chibundu sat beside her, not speaking. At last, she said, You didn't have to come to the palace. Yes, I did, he replied. You once cleaned my family's floor. I'll spend the rest of my life sweeping yours, if that's what it takes. She turned to him slowly. Maybe we just sweep together. For the first time in years, she smiled without pain. The morning sky was golden when Adeze rushed into Anwale's room, her face glowing. You have to come now. Half asleep, Anwale followed her out to the courtyard of the Obianuju Center, where the entire compound stood in a circle, holding palm branches. At the center was a giant woven scroll, painted in bright colors. Adeze stepped forward. You started with one heart. You fed us when you were starving yourself. You fought for our names when you had none. Now your name is known. She pulled the scroll open. It revealed 6 more villages. Each had donated land to build a sister center, all under the same name, Obianuju Legacy Houses. For every girl who was told to be silent, Anwale dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. But with the new growth came new pressure. Ebelechi stepped forward. You can no longer be everywhere. You must lead the vision from the capital. Join the Queen Mother's Council for Education. They'll listen to you now. Anwale looked on. If I leave, who protects this house? Adeze stepped forward, firm. We've learned, Mama Anwale. We are the ones who will protect it now. You made us strong. Let us hold it up while you lift others. Chibundu beside her smiled gently. Go, change the world. I'll keep sweeping here every morning. The day Anwale left, the girls lined the road, singing. She walked barefoot, as was tradition, towards the village border. At the last tree, she stopped and turned. She saw them, girls she once sheltered, now leaders in their own right. Adeze with the key to the compound. Ngozi, holding a baby, she now helped deliver safely for another young mother. Chibundu with his builder's belt waving. Ebelechi, silent, proud. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. I was once a maid with no name. Now I am a mother to houses built on strength. And then she walked on. In the years that followed, whenever a girl was thrown away or sold off or silenced, someone would whisper, take her to Obianuju house. They will not turn her away. And the story of the maid who became a stepmother and then a movement lived on like a folk tale, one whispered by fires for generations.